With all the talk of Xbox One doing all these new different things where they're doing lots of entertainment stuff for your television and less gaming, for me, who's a hardcore gamer, I got a little upset by it. And a while back, I made an arcade machine, kind of custom built, a lot of real specific programming specs and scripts I had to make to get everything run. Took a while to do. I'd say it's been an ongoing project. Off and on about like maybe 4 months, just sort of in the off time. This is how I feel that gaming should be. It should be simple, accessible, easy to use, friendly, and a lot of things that I love is making things simple in your living room. Because it's like, I have an Xbox 360, I have a Playstation, I have the Wii. I mean, the older systems that I have, they're all in the garage. Part of the reason why is because you can't really have them out and accessible. And if you have like storage of games in your living room or somewhere accessible, it takes up a lot of space. So making this machine was kind of pivotal for me because it saves space, it saves time, and also it makes things really easy for social gaming. Because I think that that's where most of our, time should be spent, is with each other, playing with friends, having a great time. And it looks like more and more the Xbox generation, all this stuff, is getting away from that. I haven't seen a real good 4-player game that's not multiplayer online in a very long time. They're kind of taking more of the experiences out of the living room and online, which I don't think is a really positive, a positive movement at all. I like the way that people can gather around a couch and play a game, have fun. And this machine here, which bases a lot off of retro gaming, I think is the ultimate solution for that. So kind of let me show you where I'm going, how this works, what it does, and if it inspires you to make your own, great. So this box here, this is a custom built box. I'll go over the hardware specs later. I built this one here. It's specifically for some of the more advanced games. My old arcade was a Mac Mini. It was a more modern day Mac Mini. One of the, I think a couple years back generation, still had the front loading slot for the CD in the front. And it could run everything up to Nintendo 64. The systems that I wanted to do, Gamecube and Wii and things like that, it got to a graphics limitation. You couldn't go past that point because it didn't have that good of a graphics card internally. And also the processor had to be a little bit stronger for emulating a Wii game, because Wii games and any type of emulation that goes to that point takes a lot more juice. So just to cover some of the consoles that this thing has. Now the interface is, I use an Xbox 360 controller because I think that these are the best gaming interfaces ever made. I mean, they're comfortable, they're durable, I can play for long periods of time. If I want to use throwaway batteries and destroy the earth, I can, or I can use rechargeables. I have that option. Or I can just charge them up through the front. There's a lot of great reasons why I love this as a controller. And I've used this actually universally for almost every single game that you see here. There's a couple games that you won't be able to play that are old, that have, for instance, like some of the old Intellevision games, you can see that they have knobs here. There's also some Atari games that have spinny wheels and things. Some of those you won't be able to play. So let me just show you a couple games here, or gaming consoles, what this has. It has Intellevision. Now, most of these consoles I own. So if there's any sort of weird legal hesitation of what I'm showing you here, I have an Intellevision in my garage. I have the Ataris. I have these consoles. I have the games for the Wii that I'm playing here. It's just I want something all together. I don't want to have to pull those systems out. And many of my old Intellevision games don't work anymore because the cartridges inside there have, the acids have ate away the boards, and they just don't work. Same with some of the Atari games, some of the Colecovision games that I have. And this is a way of making sure that I can play these games for the rest of, my existence, because their files don't disintegrate like they do these old games, especially Nintendo and stuff that have batteries inside there. They go bad. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I made this. So we have Intellevision, one of the very oldest systems that I ever played with. So there's Intellevision, Atari, pretty much every version of the Atari. There's a really horrible console right there, the Jaguar. I'm not even going to touch that. I got it working, but it's so awful I didn't want to touch it. Colecovision, I love Colecovision. Had a lot better graphics than Atari, in my opinion. Mame for multiple arcade machine emulators. Now, I don't own any arcade, boxes, so just bear with me on that one. Game Boy Color. Obviously, these are single-player stuff, but it's nice to be able to play some of these old games. Nintendo, Game Gear, Genesis, Sega 32X. Why they went that direction, I don't know, but we'll just keep going. Sega Cd, I had one of these, but mine was on the side. It wasn't actually sitting on top like that. That actually looks better, but they kept on making these weird add-on consoles of Genesis that don't... Anyway, Super Nintendo, I love the Super Nintendo. Probably one of the greatest machines ever made. I loved playing, with my neighbor, Mario Kart and stuff like that. This is probably one of my favorite old systems. TurboGrafx 16, these guys were weird, hard to find some of the stuff. Nintendo 64 was a great machine. I would destroy all my friends on Bond. I still do. It's really awesome. Well, I'm not pitching you the game. So it's got that. It's got Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, PlayStation 2. As we go into this direction, these are the consoles that the Mac Mini wouldn't have done. GameCube it couldn't have done, and the Wii it couldn't have done. Now, a lot of people ask, this is the top console that I have. I don't have any more than that. Some people ask, why do you want to emulate the Wii? This is why. I hate the Wii controllers. I don't like playing Mario like this. It doesn't work for me, and I don't want to fling it up and down. That's not how I want to play a game. And so I'll get into how this works a little bit later on, but this whole thing was not comfortable. I mean, if you've ever played Smash Bros. Brawl for a while, those controllers just suck. Granted, you can plug in GameCube controllers into these systems through the top and play them that way, but the problem with that is you just run into cabling issues. You have to have wireless, and then it's like everyone's attached to the console that way. And guess what? A whole bunch of games actually don't use the GameCube controller, so you're kind of stuck. This system here, the way the emulation works, is you can actually make these a hybrid controller, where instead of shaking the controller, you can actually bind it to a key and say, beep, push that button, and all of a sudden Mario spins in Super Mario Brothers, and you don't have to do that shaky thing, which is stupid. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. How does this work? Well, this is a front loader here. This is Maximus Arcade. It's a little bit older system. People who do and build these front loader systems, a lot of them like to go with Hyperspin. It's this new, real flashy, you go to the console and it loads up all this flashy stuff. That was a bit too much for me. And one of the reasons why I don't like that is because they really lock down the interface. When I was doing this system, the Wii system and the Nintendo GameCube system, these graphics and these programs weren't actually built into the emulator front loader. I actually had to make these graphics myself and put them in there. It wasn't very difficult. It's a little bit more advanced, but if you don't care about the graphics flashiness, it'll still work about the same. PlayStation 2, all these things have to be each system has to be individually configured. So this front loader here, how this works is the front loader talks to an emulator, which then loads up the ROM file and then goes from there. The reason why this is important is because if you've ever done this and you're with a whole bunch of friends and you want to actually play these games, what ends up, most of the problem is it's oh, go to the computer, grab the mouse, go to load, open. It wastes a lot of time. And for somebody, say for instance, I'm handing my controller to somebody and I say, go ahead and navigate this interface and load a game, you're in the control, they can't do that. So this system allows them to do that because all I'm doing is just left and right, and I bound these keys to the same ones as would be for Xbox. So A selects, B is back, and so other systems worked about the same way as here. So just to demo a little bit, I'm going to go into our very first system here, the Intellevision, and I'll go ahead and load it up. Now some of these games are really bad. I'm just going to pick... well, I've played Carnival a lot, and I'm going to turn the volume down because the volume is very annoying on this game. For early versions of these consoles, they required you to put a number into the keypad to get them to work. So what I devised was I actually made a keypad. Well, I didn't make it, I actually bought it. But I use it and I bind the keys. You can see how 1 through 6 there are completely open. That way I can actually select players 1 or 2. I can say 1 player, and it's going to give me a skill. I'll say levels 1 to 4, and then away she goes. So this is the game. I'm going to mute it so you don't have to hear it because it gets really annoying. And the Xbox controller controls it. It goes left and right, and you can fire. This game really wasn't that great on this console. If you're going to play this, play it, I mean, honestly, on Colecovision or one of the later Ataris. This port was not that great. So anyway, the object of this game was just to shoot things, and you move back and forth, and the ducks fly down and kill you, and blah, blah, blah. You get certain bonuses and such. Anyway, I'm actually doing really well, just not moving at all. Anyway, so this system here, it's easy to use. It's got all those little interfaces like the keypad to set the levels and things like that. So it's not too difficult to use. And so somebody playing the game, oh, I'm done. You can, the way that these controllers are bound, you can actually push left and right in at the same time, because no games actually really do that, pushing the 2 control sticks in, and it goes there. I also bound a key on my keypad that uses the exit function as well, so I can use that. Other things that are bound into the system is, through this keypad, is there's a save function here. What I actually did is I went through every single system, and ROMs allow you to do save states. What that means is, say for instance, and I go over here, I'm going to go to a system you guys are more familiar with, so I'll go over from Atari, Jaguar, ColecoVision, blah, blah, blah. Let's just go ahead and go over here to Nintendo, just because that's the universal Nintendo system. All right, and I'm going to go into Super Mario Bros., the very first one. It says Duck Hunt and Track Meet. Some of these are imports. Some of them are weird universal versions. Super Mario Bros. All right, so here's Super Mario Brothers. I'm going to do a 1-player game. All right. And moving along, moving along. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump, and I'll save the state there. It says save state slot 1. I keep playing, keep playing. Oh, I died. I can actually hit load, and I go right back there again. So for anybody who wants to like play a game to pass it through some of these extremely difficult stuff, you can do that. And it's kind of nice because even with the Wii games, if you're trying to unlock some of those, there's some really hard things to unlock, like some of the stuff in Super Mario Bros. Load the state, save it however you want, and then you can just go right back there again with just a push of a button. Now, I only have 1 save state selected to work inside of this, but you can actually go through and use this as well to do multiple save states. I just did it to 1 because I figured you only really need 1, because if you save it to a different slot, which one was that save? It's kind of a pain. The other feature that this has is a screen capture. So if I click the screen capture button, you'll hear it. There's a little click that happens. So when I actually exit the game, and I'll use the exit here, it'll actually appear over here on the side. So I get a preview of my game. Now, this is nice because it loads the ROM list here, and you just capture it from the game into here, and so, oh, okay, there's a real graphic representation. Because if you were to go through and try and do pictures of everything, that's a little redundant. This is nice. It's like, oh, I'm playing this game, it's one of my favorites. I'll screen grab it so I know, oh, that's the version, that one, so to speak. Now, all of these have different configurations, and some of them are very weird, some of them are very difficult to use, and also some of them require some scripting for them to work. So this right here is the front end of things. You can see that it just goes through. I can go to System and load a game, Genesis. I loved X-Men Clone Wars. This was one of my favorite games I have. And it's in a list. It's easy to get to. The keys are all mapped to where they're supposed to be. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. But so yeah, so that's basically the front loading system to it. Some of the benefits, really quickly, of doing this is, and I'm not sure how well this is going to work with the screen capture, is it's up-resing as well. So say, for instance, you have some of these old games, like even the Wii. The Wii was a standard def system. So if you wanted to play something in HD, you didn't really have that option. So let me go ahead and go over here to Let's see here. Super Mario Brothers Wii. I'll say Super Smash Bros. Brawl. This is one of my favorite games to play. I mean, you can, say for instance, you have some of these save states on your Wii system. You can actually export them and import them into your this emulated system as well. That gets a little difficult. I kind of just started over to do this, so it makes sense. Now there's some stuff, because these things are emulated, there are some things that are tricky and some things that are weird. So you have to kind of like play with them and tweak them. There are some glitches in the game. Like I have seen a lot more freezes in the Wii emulation than I have in any other console. And sometimes there will be moments where the audio glitches out. Let's just go into solo and I'll do a classic game here. And I'm a big fan of Kirby. I'm a Kirby guy. Okay, so I'm going up against Link right now. It up-reses everything. So I'm actually playing Super Smash Bros. Not on a Wii U, in a total emulated environment. Oh, you got it behind me. I'll play this game all day long. But I'm just using the Xbox 360 controller to play. It's not very hard to do. It's pretty easy to control. It's based off of the controller functions, just like you would have if you were using a what do you call it? If you're using a GameCube controller. This is pretty much mapped out just like the GameCube controller. So I'll just quit the game here. I'll exit it. So that's a nice thing, is it up-reses everything. For those of you who actually buy the Maximus Arcade here, now Maximus Arcade front loader, I think to get a license for it is like $29, somewhere around there. It's not very expensive. It's a great back-end system to get everything working. It does cost a little bit, but it's great to have that as a working model. So that costs you something. Also, for some of these games, I use a program called Xpadder, which does some of the button mappings, which get a little tricky sometimes. But so let's go ahead and I'll go system by system and explain a little bit of how they work and some of the hurdles you're going to have to overcome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the hardware of how this thing works. This is a shuttle chassis right here. Inside is a micro ATX motherboard. As you can see, it's not very wide at all. It's pretty deep. The reason I chose this in particular was because I wanted it to fit in my entertainment center. It is not as wide as the Xbox 360 and PlayStation, but it is significantly deeper. From side to side, it's about 9 inches side to side, and about, let's say, about 7.5 inches tall. But the depth of it is 14 inches, so it's got a lot of depth to it. Sitting in the back, it's got a very large fan on top, and also it's got a mounted fan on the side connected directly to the GPU. One of the reasons why I love this case in particular with the micro ATX motherboard is because this case is designed to have a massive graphics card. Like, you can have one that's 2 bays wide, and I believe, well, it can go as long as, it can go pretty long in the for the graphics card. I haven't been able to find too many graphics cards that don't fit, but I would recommend checking out the manufacturer's like specs to make sure that your graphics card will fit inside this case. Other reasons why I really like it is because it's got a lot of nice airflow. It's got also the option of putting a CD-ROM in the front if you want it, but pretty much I went without because I didn't really need anything in particular here in the front. I don't really do much front-loading discs anymore. It's got 2 USB 3.0 jacks in the front that plug directly into the motherboard, so you got really high speed. The motherboard that I used was a special ASUS kind. I'll put the specs actually inside the video notes. But for that, it was able to fit inside there, and it had a lot of built-in things in the motherboard because you can't add any cards on. So you have to make sure that the Wi-Fi is built in the motherboard. You could get, you know, external Wi-Fi and external Bluetooth if you really wanted to. But for this setup in particular, I decided to have most of it inside. You also have on the back, there's a lot of USB ports. And I'm a big fan of being able to plug in everything, especially for all the different peripherals that I want to plug into this. Now in the front right now, I have a keyboard and mouse hooked up, and also one of my cameras for when I'm doing the screen capture. But in particular, I don't really use too many of the front ports unless I am plugging in optional USB controllers. I'll go into that a little bit more in detail when I get into some of the more advanced plugins there. Two of the things that I do have up here on top, one of them is the Microsoft 360 receiver. That will allow you to plug in up to 4 Microsoft wireless Xbox controllers. These will work perfectly inside of Windows. They're easy to connect. You pretty much just, you can assign it just like you would pairing it to a Xbox 360, except you just push the button on top. These things actually are only about I think they're only about $20 each, which is not a whole lot. The nice thing is, and most people don't know about this, you can actually put 2 of these on one system. So you can have up to 8 controllers. That gets really difficult to work out the configuration for. The reason why is because when these get paired up, it does 1, 2, 3, 4 here and 1, 2, 3, 4 here, but it doesn't show any lights on the second controllers, which can get a little confusing. Also, for some games, the first controller and then controller 5 would then have some conflicts inside there. But there's ways to get around that, which I'll go into later. The other thing that's here on the front, this is a infrared receiver. This was just a really simple, cheap one I got on Amazon. It came with the remote control. Matter of fact, here's the remote control here. One of the reasons why I thought this was a great idea to get is because I needed something to send out an infrared signal to pair with my Harmony remote. So that I used this to program the Harmony remote, and then obviously I left this as my receiver. Typically I don't like using a lot of remotes in my systems for all my different peripherals, so I kind of do use one remote, the Harmony remote. But for this in particular, you kind of need it to actually pair some of the devices. The other thing that's useful is it has a lot of extra controls up here that you can program into your front loader. Like if you notice there's a yellow, blue, green, and red. Normally these would be assigned to some things inside of Windows, like you can have it open up your videos folder, your music folder, your photos, blah, blah, blah. For me, I didn't really want to use that, but what I did was I was able to assign these infrared IDs to other functions inside of the front loader. Like for instance, this takes a screen capture, this adds a game to the favorites, this quits the console, this restarts the computer, all things that I programmed inside there to use inside of Harmony. And I'll kind of go through that a little bit later. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this is if you don't have a mouse, this little center button here will actually use, just like a mouse, you can kind of like pan the mouse across the screen, and then it has right click and left click, something that I haven't seen on too many remotes, and I was very pleased to find that feature. Let's see, that pretty much covers all the features inside this. Now, one thing I will note that I do have to have airflow on the top and when you're looking at it on the left side of the chassis, because that's where the GPU is, right here on the side. I want to make sure that the airflow goes through here. There's plenty of space here on the top. So if you're trying to put this in some sort of box configuration, make sure you have plenty of space on the left and top. Not so much on the right. There's not really too many vents there. I think there is some airflow, but nothing, no intake or outtake fans. So yeah, so that pretty much covers the hardware here. Just to cover a couple more things really quickly, I do have and use all 4 Xbox controllers here, but I also do have other optional ones to plug into the USB ports in front. This is an old Microsoft Sidewinder controller. I don't even know if they use these things anymore. So this was one of the other controllers, and I have one more here, a Logitech as well. The reason why I like these and the reason why I like the Xbox controllers is because they work pretty natively inside of Windows. I've tried using some of the PlayStation remote. I've tried using some of the PlayStation controllers, but I ran into a lot of problems with it pairing with the same IDs as some of the Microsoft controllers. For some reason, when I would plug in a Microsoft controller and then even with a PlayStation 3 controller that was plugged in, it'd have some pairing issues. So I'm not sure if it's a good idea to try and mix and match. You probably can if you go through and really try and find some ways to map it out, especially with like Xpadder and things like that. But for my purposes, it worked really well to have 4 Xbox controllers for my defaults, and then for any games I want to play 6 or 8 players, I have the 2 controllers in front and then 2 more Xbox controllers. Yes, I have a lot of Xbox controllers. I've gone through a lot. I had one of the original like Xboxes, one of the release dates, and Chihuahua kind of chewed up the controls a little bit, so I've gotten replacements. But when you're playing a game like Bomberman, where you have 6 or 8 players, it's not really going to take up a lot of, like, no. There's not a lot of controls and feedback that you need to have a really good controller for, so this works just fine. So that pretty much covers the hardware here. Now let's go into a little bit of the software, and I'll show you a bit of how the front end works on the configuration side. Okay, very quickly talking about some of the technical specifications for the computer. One of the things that this requires for if you want to do the Wii emulation, like I'm saying, if you want to do PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, GameCube, or Wii, you're going to have a really strong processor, strong graphics, and also the processor most likely will have to be overclocked. This version that I have here, it's a i7 3770K CPU overclocked. It can get up to about, I believe, 4.2 gigahertz overclocked, and that's kind of required for some of the more advanced games. Like if you play Mario Kart with 4 players, you really need to have, that's like one of the most high-end requirements for a system. So that is kind of a necessary thing. All right, now moving on to the Maximus Arcade. So Maximus Arcade is the front-loading program. This right here is its configuration screen. Now, inside of here, you'll see that there's a configuration screen here, and it goes through, and you can configure any system you want. Now, if you look at this list, it's a lot. 3DO multiplayer, it's got Atari, basically every system you saw there plus more. I'm not using every system in the bunch here. I'm only using some of them, but it gives you options for even more. Over here, you have a display order to show, oh, okay, well, I like to have the display order show games from the very beginning of time to, the most present. So the older you go is towards the top, and the newest are on the bottom. Game lists here. For all the different games and ROMs that you have, it keeps them all in order. You can go through and, like for Nintendo Entertainment System, a whole bunch of games here. The nice thing is when you set your folder for where all these are, it scans them and does everything for you. Now, if you're wondering where to get these ROMs, I'm not going to tell you because that would be wrong. No, but seriously though, if you own the game, it's legal to have the ROM. I have a whole bunch in here just to show you. So there's the database where everything is held, the audio interface. Right here, I have a custom front loader that I designed that has those special GameCube and Wii screens. This one, my monitor is currently set at 1920 by 1080. One of the downfalls of this system is it's not as adaptive as I'd liked it to be. If you were to take this system and go from, say, your house to another person's house who has, say, a 720 monitor or something like that, it's not exactly, it doesn't adapt very well. Some of the programs actually won't like scale properly. And the reason why that is because you kind of set it for one resolution, including these the individual emulators. But when you go back to, in between systems, if it's trying to say, oh, now I'm 1280 by 720 and blah, 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 some TVs aren't that adaptive and they can't figure it out. I have a Samsung TV, it figures it out, a lot of it. But if I take my system over to my buddy's, who is a HD, is just 720, it's just not as good. So 1080p is the resolution of this monitor. Over here, the controller interface. This right here is how you control the interface itself. Right now I have my Xbox controller. As you can see, it's got up, down, left, right. All these things are just how I navigate through the menus. So you'll notice that there's page up and page down and some other commands in here. Those are actually for my remote control that's coming through the infrared device. So I can control any of these things at any time. If I go into the Setup 2 menu, here's my favorites list that I can go through. Say if I have a favorite game that's for the NES or Mame or things like that, I can navigate through there. Also, if I want to shut down or quit the front ends, I have controls for that. So this is kind of nice and neat if you want to have different controls bound to it. Personally, I don't like having a keyboard in front of me. I like to use just my little gamepad here, so that this is something I don't want to have on my couch when I'm playing a game. This is something I can put on my coffee table, not worry about. It's wireless. It's pretty free and easy to use. Okay, so moving on. There's a lot of different options for some of the, you can do some startup priorities, screensavers, things like that. I don't really mess with many of these things over here, but they're over there, and there's a README file for documentation. Okay, so going into the configurations here, each one is a slightly different. So for Atari 2600 here, it's using an emulator called MES64. Now, MES64 can get a little bit difficult to program sometimes. So I have everything organized in my C prompt folder in a folder called Arcade. And inside of here, I actually have it in my Colecovision folder. And there's my MES64 right there. And I use MES64 actually emulates Atari. It emulates Coleco, a lot of those different ones, including Intellevision as well. So I have inside of there, my ROMs folder also contains BIOSes for all these different systems. So there's my Atari. Now down here, a lot of this stuff gets loaded in automatically. This command line comes up specifically for when I loaded my Colecovision file here. Some of them you have to do manually. So there's my Atari 2600. 5200, same way, except it loads in a different BIOS. That's that first line there. If I go down to my Atari 7800, same thing. If I go down to my Atari 800, I don't have it, so it's empty. Atari Jaguar, I do have it, but it's awful, so I'm going to skip it, like I told you. Batch files here. Batch files are interesting. I actually have a couple batch files saved. Batch files are kind of like command prompts for executing files. So say, for instance, I have a batch file I've created for shutting down the system. I can actually, inside my front loader, go and shut something down. I can also put a batch file that's a link to another program, like say, for instance, this is a normal PC, so if I want to play like Half-Life 1 or 2, I can do that from inside there. I haven't configured it for that, but you could do that. This could be your new entertainment system. If you, say, for instance, Xbox One or PlayStation doesn't win the war at all for you, this is a PC for your living room. It does cost a little bit more than, say, just getting a console to get all these parts and pieces together, but it's a computer, so you can use it for multiple, you can use it for a lot of different things, whatever you want to. So there's the batch files and where those locations are. ColecoVision, now here's the same thing. I just use, instead of the MES64, which is 64-bit, MES here is the 32-bit version. All these command lines are pretty much the same. Commodore 64, I've actually played with these a little bit. I have a Commodore Amiga. I'm still working, trying to debug this system. Commodore Amiga was a great system. I loved it. I had an Amiga 500 as a kid, so that's why I want to get this working again. But it's mouse controller based, so I'm not a big fan of putting this on the screen because it doesn't make much sense to have in the living room. Let's see here, Daphne. So once we get into these systems, Daphne I didn't have, but DOSBox here. If you notice, this is the Dolphin loader. This is Dolphin.exe. This is the Wii system that I have. Actually, no, DOSBox, this is the GameCube. So this is the front loader here, Dolphin.exe, which is available for free online. There's where I keep my ROMs for GameCube, and this is where I keep the snapshots of the game. And there's the command line to load it. Now the pre-launch, what I actually have here for many of my systems is I remap the keys. The reason why I do this is because inside these systems, they'll have different keys for saving and loading with the ROMs. So if I go down here into, let's see here, this is in the Wii system, because the Wii emulator actually works the same for GameCube. Dolphin loads the GameCube ROMs and also the other ROMs for the Wii system. So if I open this up and take a look at Dolphin Remap, I use something called Auto Hotkey. And what I do is, this script here, I can edit it. This is the script that I have that remaps the states. So when I do a load state, I instead of binding it from the F1 key, I actually bound it to the / key. So that's how I was able to do that. I do this a lot for a lot of different systems as well because their save states don't map in the right area. So there's my pre-launch. My post-launch actually runs a batch script which looks just like this, which is kill remap, which basically is just a batch file that opens up that folder and says kill the Dolphin remap. So that way that this remap folder, I basically made this script. It's an auto hotkey script. It's .exe now because you can compile it. So it loads that script on launch and then kills it once you close it out. This is one of the reasons why I love Maximus Arcade, is because you can do that within the command line here and also put in some paths. Now it might get a little complicated because this stuff can get a little bit, you know, dicey. What do I launch beforehand and close it? What's my window states, short or normal? Some of that stuff is hard to figure out. Hopefully some of this will give you a little bit of a tip of how to do it. It's a lot of trial and error, depending on what you want in the system. So moving on further, so this is the DOS box, which is the Gamecube. Flash player I don't have configured. Mame. So here's the Mame system. There's not really much for pre or post launch because I was able to, you can remap the keys inside there. If I go down to Intellevision, this right here, Intellevision, that's the Intellevision system. It's also MES. It's got all the launch stuff. You know, INTV is the ROM it's loading for the BIOS. There's the cart. All this stuff is basically all command prompt based. So if this mes.exe, if you run this from a command prompt, it's basically mes.exe, then intv-cart, %file, game skip, so all that stuff's inside of there. This is all like what you can run from just a command prompt. Because it's the front loader just goes to pretty much to DOS, that's how it works. NEC PC Engine, TurboGrafx 16. This goes to the TurboGrafx 16 emulator. You know, just the different configurations and setups for it. These command lines are how it executes full screen. There's no pre or post launch for this. Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. With the Nintendo Entertainment System, this is where I start to use a program called Xpadder. Now, what Xpadder does is it loads up profiles that you can configure for your controllers. Like, say, for instance, obviously this is not a Nintendo controller, but you want to be able to like plug this in at any time and have it loaded. Some of these older systems, this is using Nestopia, which is an emulator. For it to work, it like looks for your controller, but sometimes if this is not connected, the configuration file that's inside of Nestopia won't work anymore. So typically what you want to do for things like Nintendo and some of these older systems, which just had keys to control, you want to bind them to actually keys on your keyboard. So if you bind it to the keys on the keyboard, and then with Xpadder, you assign those keys to controls here. And this is what I mean. So if I was to load the Nintendo emulator system here with Xpadder, so there's the command. So I'm actually going to copy this command. All right, so put my controller down, so Control C, and I'll just bring up an elevated command prompt. And I'll paste that there. So there's the executable file. And then these are the actual XPad profiles. Now this took me a long time to figure out, is if you want to have multiple profiles load up, like say you have more than one controller, which most likely you will for your consoles, it's a pain in the ass, and no, I couldn't find this answer anywhere, of how you load up multiple profiles for multiple controllers. So there's the command right there. As you can see, it's xpadder.exe, and then afterwards, there's xpadder profile 1, and then xpadder profile 2. This will work for as many controllers as you have. So let me just go ahead, and I will go ahead and turn on my second controller here. So now I have controller 1 and controller 2. And I'll just go ahead and over here hit enter. Oh, it didn't get that first command. Ah, doggone it. So apparently, if I run it from the command prompt, it's got that space in there. I'll do it again, and hopefully, if I put a quotation mark in front of it and after it, it's not going to give me a hard time. Okay, so right now, Xpadder just loaded. You can't really see it unless you look in the corner. But down here, there's our Xpadder. Go ahead and open it up. And there's my Nintendo 1 controller and my Nintendo 2 controller. Now you can see what it does is it gives the controls, assigns them to keys on the keyboard. And the reason why that's great is because inside your program, you're actually going to map these keys to these keys. So it's like inside of my emulator for Nintendo. If I go over here to Wii and Arcade, and I go into Nintendo NES, and my, let's see here, my program that I'm using to launch is Nestopia. So go ahead and open up Nestopia. Now Nestopia is configured to go full screen on launch. So I'm just going to hit Alt-Enter, which is the universal key to not go full screen. And it's going to shrink down really, really small over here. If I hit Alt, it gives me a couple options. So if I go over here to Input, all these controls have been assigned to Pad 1 and things like that. So it's kind of like an intermediary between the two. Okay, so that covers the Xpadder unit here. The great thing about Xpadder, and the reason why I like it and assign it this way with these controllers profiles, is because when you have multiple controllers loading up in this configuration, it's really difficult for the computer to know which controller is what. And also, if your controllers disconnect, the Xpadder will load it up and reload based on the controller if the controller goes on and off. Rule of thumb is that have the controller on before you even launch the program from the front loader. So I'll go ahead and I'll close these down and close down Nestopia. Now down here in the corner we have Xpadder still open, which I would close. My post-launch for this, for the kill remap in my Nintendo Entertainment System, if I was to open this up and say edit, it actually goes through and says, so inside the batch script, there's a couple other things in here, but basically I kill the xpadder.exe. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go over to, there's Nintendo Entertainment System, Super NES, same thing. There's a pre-launch and post-launch. Nothing for this one. It's all configured inside of Nintendo 64 or the Super NES. Nintendo 64 is a little bit more difficult. There is no post or pre-launch. It actually configures itself. But I will say for the Nintendo 64, the actual program itself is Project 64. Inside of here, there are some plugins to use, especially for controllers. If I configure my controller plugin, it's actually Billiards X Input. You can change input plugins on this, which is kind of nice. I use Billiards X Input version 2.0. The reason I use this is because I used Xbox 360 controllers, and this maps it out perfectly every time. I don't have to worry about it. But if you wanted to use a different one, you can. That one just seems to work really well with the Force controllers, and also I think it actually uses the vibration controls as well for Project 64. So nothing really special about that. We'll kind of skip down to the next one, Nintendo Game Boy. These are all off of Visual Boy Advanced. Those are pretty much, there's no remapping has to be done there. Some of the more difficult systems we'll get to in a second. I'll just kind of skip Game Boy Color and Advance. Those are all the same. Sega Genesis, those are all pretty much the same. There's Sega Remap. I did actually do a remap for the save games for Sega Genesis. That's just to get that little keypadder to work. Sega 32X, Sega CD, all those things pretty much the same way. They're all individually configured from inside their own programs. When you get down to Sega Saturn was actually the hardest one to configure for me, but also one of my most prized systems. And the reason why is because Sega Saturn is one of the few systems that can have up to 10 controllers. Something that I wish more systems did was allow more than, say, 4 players to play. The Sega Saturn system, being a system that actually has a total of multi-ports up to 10 controllers, is huge. Sega Saturn has a game called Bomberman. Now, I love Bomberman. To get this to work was the biggest pain because you have 4 controllers. So you have 4 Xbox controllers for one, and then you have the additional controllers, additional 2 controllers that have the same mappings. So here's something that you'll run into if you want to go beyond 4 controllers with the Xbox. So I have 1 controller here. So here's 1, it's bound, 2 is bound. Let me get controller. All right, so this will be number 3. All right, so this one is bound to number 3. Move that off the side. And this one here is number 4. So there's number 4. So I have all 4 controllers. Now I have even more controllers here. I have a Halo controller and another black Xbox controller. So I'll go ahead and plug in a new battery pack to that one. This one's a little tricky. And I'm just binding it right now to the system, I'm pretty sure it's bound. There's no lights, which is a little tricky on the when you go for controllers 5 and 6. This one I'll turn on and I'll map it. Yeah, my Xbox just turned on because this is the one that's currently bound to it. All right, so this one just got it here. I'll turn off my Xbox now. So this is number 6, no lights, so you have no idea. If I was to open up Xpadder right now, if I go into Arcade, I actually have, well, actually, I could open up that command prompt one last time, but I'm not going to. So there's that. So the Xpadder, I actually have another folder. Let's see here. It's Max 2.0, Arcade Utilities. And there is Xpadder there. I have a lot of configurations inside of here for other controllers and other tests that I've done. So if I open up Xpadder right now, you'll notice that it has 6 controllers all the way across the board, which is great. But here's the problem. Just to explain it, is controller 1 and controller 4, I'm sorry, controller 1 and controller 5, according to the computer, have the exact same input. The only thing that can differentiate between controller 1 and controller 5 is Xpadder. Xpadder does a great job of saying, oh, okay, well, you have controller 1 here and controller 5, so you can see that these light up on the screen. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's the controls there. And then if I was to go over to number 5, and now I move it around, the controller 5, you can see that it actually identifies it and works, which is a big, big thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in controllers number 7 and 8. So if I were to put in controller 7 now, I'm using both controllers, or both ports in the front right now, which isn't very helpful. So there's the controller 6 and controller 7. I'm just go ahead and I don't want to unplug my keyboard in the front, but I'll go ahead and plug this guy into the back as well. Okay, there we go. So now all 7 controllers are plugged in. If you were to buy, and it'll pop up here in a second, if you were to buy the Xpadder program, these images don't come up by default. You actually have to put them there. It'll like make a line of controls, and you inside the program you actually load it up, put it in there, and like assign the bitmap, and then move the keys around however you want to. These are ones that I've already pre-configured, which are already ready to go. Just waiting on this last controller here, which doesn't see. Oh, no wonder. It's actually that PlayStation 3 controller. So don't use PlayStation 3 controllers, like I said. Sometimes they come up, sometimes they don't. It's really tricky. If you want to get ones that are specific to Windows, that's going to be a lot easier for you to deal with. Now, most likely it would probably be easier to do this with controllers that are not all Xbox controllers. I just use with what I have. So, I mean, if I have 6 controllers, I want to use the Xbox controllers of them. So right now, amazingly, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 controllers all plugged in. They're all responding as they should be. I'll just double check. This right here is the last one, the Logitech. If you notice, this one actually saved a profile. This one actually has keys assigned to it. That's great, especially for like the Microsoft ones and things like that. That's great for these to get assigned that way. A lot of the Xbox ones don't, especially when you go into 5 and 6. It gets really, really hairy. So this is what I did to make that work. So in the Sega Saturn over here, in my pre-launch, I have an exe called Sega Saturn Remap.exe. If I was to go over here and open up Sega Saturn, so it's an Arcade, Sega Saturn, and there's Sega Saturn Remap. If I go ahead and edit the script, I can see, okay, well there is, it's basically doing 2 things. It's running the Xpadder.exe and loading up my 4 profiles. So it's saying, okay, run Xpadder and then run profile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's loading all those up and also remapping a key to use that save state function on here. So it's kind of doing multiple things because you only have, in this path, you can only have 1 executable. So I nested 2 executables inside of one to make that work. So inside of here, what I'll do is I'm just going to run this exe file, the Sega Saturn Remap. And if you notice in the background, something just happened to my Xpadder program. So over here, I now have keys that are actually mapped out to where they're supposed to be. Now, for my controller 1, I use all the arrow directional keys, Q, R, T, Y. I'm maximized the best that I can with the system and also the Sega Saturn program. So I have this for controller 1, controller 2, I use different keys, controller 3. Now you'll notice that some of the controllers like 3 and 4, I'm actually using very little mapping on this. Like these 2 keys here aren't even mapped to the keyboard keys. The reason why is because certain keys on 3 and 4 will actually work properly in the system. I had to find a weird balance between them because some keys ghosted others and some didn't. So my controller 3 only used those key mappings. Controller 4 had to use all of them. And then controller 5 had to use all of them as well. If you see I'm using like F6, F7s, X's, these are all keys that aren't being used inside the program itself. So there's all those as well. And then over here with the the Microsoft Sidewinder controller, I only have 1 key that had to be remapped. This was a lot of trial and error to see which ones actually worked. And then the last one here, obviously you already saw that with a Logitech. That's controller number 8. So I'm just going to go ahead and launch the program to show you a little bit of how this works. I'm not launching it from the front loader. So here's the front loader here. And I'm going to Alt return so it's not full screen. And I'm just going to go ahead and go to File and open the ISO for Bomberman. Because this is one of my favorite games of all time. I really wanted to get this to work for 8 people because, let's face it, 8 people playing one game on one screen is something that I don't think has happened in a very long time. So there's that. So I'm just going to go ahead and load in with my controller 1. I'm just going to get past some of these loading screens. It's the graphics aren't the best because it's it's a little bit old, but the gameplay on this is actually probably the best that I've seen in like most of the Xbox Live stuff. It's not the graphics anymore that defines a game. It's how you can play it. And that seems to be lost on a lot of games nowadays. They don't really care how you play it, where you play it with people. They're just graphic intensive, crazy stuff instead of something that's really fun. Great example of a Sideline, great example of a great game, not the best graphics, but it's amazing to play is I actually had to go look on my shelf. I forgot the name. It's Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That on PS3 and Xbox, that's awesome. So, okay, so go ahead and do this real quick. Match, series, battle, normal. We'll do singles. 8 people, all men. That's fine. Rules. I don't really care about this stuff. There's no computers. Bombers. I'll go through and hit the number A key. So I went through, hit all of them, hit the A keys on those, hit the stage. I'm just going to do the classic stage of this one here. So this is the actual working version of this. To get 8 controllers to work simultaneously in this program is difficult. And the reason why is because the limitations of the keyboard itself. There aren't enough keys on the keyboard that aren't being used by the program to get all the controls of a controller. Because you think up, down, left, right, there's 4. A, B, there's another 2. Start, there's another 1. And then another top one. So there's at least 10 plus on each one. So that it gets really, really like heavy. So you have to find the right balance. If you used all controllers that were not Xbox 360, you might have better luck. Okay, so there's my character, Bomberman in the corner. He plants a bomb, runs away. Running over to player 2. There's player 2 down there. Sets a bomb, runs away. Player 3. Where's player 3? Oh, crap. And okay, so what happened there was apparently my screen capture software uses the same keys as controller 3. So I'm not going to touch that. Okay, so you're just gonna have to pretend that controller 3 does work because of that glitch there. Player 4, and then it just messed up all my mappings. Ah, crap. See, this is the problem with having screen capture software. And 5's out of the game. Yeah, it screwed the pooch on that one. All right, so well, there's controller 5, and then there's controller 6, and controller 7's up there, and controller 8 is up here. So all of them do work. They're just, unfortunately, my recording software was bound to the same keys, so it kind of screwed things up. But they all do. Oh, a dinosaur! Yay! So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. Oh, they don't blow it up all the way. So it's a lot of fun. It's one of the few games you could actually do 8 players with. So I'm a big fan of it. Just don't be running the recording software at the exact same time. You live and learn. I've had a lot of weird glitches like that, but it is possible to do that. I'm going to unplug all my controllers now, save batteries. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, quickly going back to the configuration stuff. This is the Sega Saturn, which I went through a little bit. All of these have to be individually configured. The Sega Dreamcast as well has to be, I guess it's got no pre or post launch there, but the scan folders and the launch. A lot of this stuff, Sega Dreamcast, you will have to set by yourself. I'm just showing you a little bit of kind of the programs that I use. PlayStation 1, I use a program called EPSX, and then there's the command line for that if you need to know it. Some of this stuff you actually have to set manually. I don't think it actually loaded when I did this one. And then for PlayStation 2, which is percentage file, there are some pre-launch and post-launches for this as well. I think that's for the save state stuff. And then for these programs, especially, there's a lot of configuration in terms of like the graphics stuff. So if I was to say open up Sega Saturn over here, and I open up and go into my PlayStation 2 folder, and it's running this one. It's got a lot of system configurations. A lot of this stuff I don't want to go into too deep for the, you know, some of the emulation settings and things like that, because they can get pretty dicey and pretty complicated. They're not difficult. There's a lot of help files on them. I think if I was to show you a little bit, everyone would be bugging me via email to try and say, how do you do this? And that's not really the intention of this video. I can help a little bit, but I'm by no means an expert. So there's Sony PlayStation. I will say that the Wii itself, to cover that one a little bit, I believe this is the Wii right here. If you open up Dolphin, which is in my Wii folder here. So Dolphin is the emulator that runs the system. I'll go ahead and open it. It has the options of binding in Wiimotes. Now, as a recommendation, the Wiimotes are a pain in the ass to work with. The reason why Bluetooth connectivity to here, it seems like every single time I was trying to use the Bluetooth connector for the Wii, something was going wrong. Either something didn't map properly, I'd have to reconnect the controllers all the time. So I just said forget it. And in the Wiimote section, I have an emulated Wiimote, and then I configure it. And so what I did was I created my own based off of my Xbox input. You can see my device there. So there's my Xbox controller. The AB, all the maps out are all very different. And then I have a shake shoulder. L is that Z axis there, so that my L button, which is actually this trigger on the right, I'm sorry, this trigger on the left, the bumper, controls the shake, so I don't have to do that stupid thing like I was telling you about. So yeah, so that's the configuration for that. It's not difficult to do, and it's so much better to play Mario Kart and Mario with the Xbox controllers rather than something, you know, that complicated and awful. So that's pretty much it. That covers most of the interfaces and all the command lines. Some of this stuff, like some of the commands for how you get certain things to load full screen and things like that, you have to configure inside the individual emulators. You have to play a lot with the settings, especially with some of the graphics stuff. Now, I will say that there are certain games, like in order to get that screen capture function to work inside the arcade, that can get a little tricky. So now that we're back here at the front loader, now there's a lot of these things that have to be individually configured themselves for the controls and for what's mapped to what. You'll have to do a little bit of scripting depending on what you want to do. The screen capture function for some of these have to be put on certain accelerated modes. Like say for instance inside of ColecoVision here, and some of these to, in order for this Mountain King, apparently this is the one I'm going to do. In order for some of these to work properly, you really have to go through and kind of, oh, this is the keypad again, 1. All right, I've never played this game before in my life, so yay. All right, so I don't know how to play this game. Yeah, I'll go to something I do know how to play. Mr. Do, there we go. So for the screen capture thing to work, you do have to sometimes make the sacrifice of not putting it on some of the higher end graphics like accelerations, like especially for ColecoVision. And there are other systems that the screen capture will just not work for. For instance, the Nintendo 64, because it uses the engine that it uses, it won't do screen capture very well. So these systems here, if you want to do screen capture, you're going to have to kind of go about it a different way. And make sure that the MES system is in this emulator is set to the software GL based, if that makes sense. It'll make sense when you go into the configurations, but software GL, I believe, is the one that I picked to make sure that these actually capture properly. There are other games that actually have controls inside there directly. They have to change a little bit. But pretty much, it's a really simple, easy system to use. It takes a long time to set up. And a lot of I'll pull my hair out at moments, but really it may take you a couple days to work with, but you're constantly making it better. When I first did this system on my Mac Mini, I had Genesis, Nintendo, NES, a couple of real small ones, and then I got more and more and more. And I love these systems because they're fun, it's simple, it's the classics. I don't have to be online to play. I play with my friends with our multiple controllers. We get to play some of these early consoles actually even allow for four player because they had multi-taps themselves. So it's really awesome to play some of these for the first time on a system that really, because let's face it, Mario Kart 64 is probably one of the greatest games that was ever made. And the battle mode for this is unprecedented. But you can't really, it's hard to play it anymore because, well, to get out the old consoles, this takes up very little space. And all these old games as well get re-rendered in modern graphics. Like if, I gotta go Toad. I mean, how can you not go Toad? Blah, blah, blah. That's fine, the first one. These games actually get reprocessed for HD graphics. Now, granted, all these carts were actually sprite-based, so they're lower res, but all the stuff in the background is all high res. Oh, yeah, well, it happens. Here's a tip about Mario Kart. You always want to be in last place. It's the easiest place to be. So it's all just rendered in HD now on these monitors. Yeah, this is 50cc. This is almost too easy. But anyway, so there's the system. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have questions or such, let me know. My Twitter is @WaylandProd. Self-promotion, I do Wear Alive. This is kind of one of my side projects. I love tinkering in the technology area. That's why I'm wearing this shirt. I love technology. I love making things work and kind of doing these special hacks and things like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If this inspires you to make your own gaming machine, great. I encourage it because with these Xbox One and PS4, all these coming out, gaming is a social thing, and I still want to see that come alive. Used games and all. Yeah. And as you can see, it is possible to put old machines in new ones and still make them work. So I understand that some of these new generations can't, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, you'll see this system, as the processors get better and better, eventually you will see Xbox, PS3 on here, because there will always be an avenue for people using these consoles in a way that the PC can actually emulate it and do what the console builders didn't do right, so to speak. So there it is. Thank you for watching, and good luck on your system.